Okay, lots to say in this video. So we're gonna get into mastering now. Now, before we get into mastering, few things that we need to know about mastering. I already told you the big misconception, which is that mastering happens in your mix. Not true, although at the end of this, I will talk about one kind of situation where it kind of does. But for the most part, we mix, then we bounce, and then we master a 2-channel final version, this mix wave that we have. So we already know that. Let's start with talking about terminology just real quick. Don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but I want you to be aware that there is a growing movement of professionals that are starting to use the term mastering less and less. It's kind of falling out of favor. Instead, we're saying maximizing. That's my preferred word, but also people are using finishing. So you might see maximizing, finishing, mastering. The reason is there's a lot of language around pro audio, and probably everywhere in our society, that is considered by some to be oppressive language. And having a master-slave relationship, which is a term we use in audio all the time, which is really strange. But we're trying to get rid of terms like that. So master is kind of going away, but so just know that when you encounter mastering, it might be called mastering, it might be called finishing, it might be called maximizing. I'm going to try to use the term maximizing, but it's a relatively new term, so I might slip up and call it mastering. Okay, that's thing number one. Thing number two, the goal of mastering: loud and clean. That's what we want. Clean is maybe relative, right? Because you might have like just really raw music, and that's okay too, but we want it loud and, let's say, clear. Loud and clear. Now let's talk about this loud thing for a minute. If you're like me, you're thinking, how can this song be loud? Loud is a function of like the dial on my stereo or my audio player, right? Like that's how loud the track is. I'm just going to turn it up or turn it down. That's true. I always used to think of it like remember those old beer commercials where they would say like, it's the coldest beer, and you're like, why? Cold is a function of my refrigerator, not your beer. That's really strange, but it's not really like that. The reason is, when you hear a song on the radio, let's say you're driving down the road and you're listening to the radio and you hear a song, then you hear another song after that. Okay. If the next song is just quieter, like you didn't do anything to your stereo, it just is quieter than the previous song. So you reach for the knob and you turn it up, right? Because the music you're hearing now is quiet relative to the previous one. So then the next song comes on and it's loud, so it blasts you away. Now you change the radio station. So suddenly the radio station does not want to play your music anymore because it doesn't fit in with everything else. That's the loudness that we're talking about here. So our goal here is to really prevent people from reaching for the dial to turn it down or turn it up, right? We want it to mix in, to blend with everything else. And the trend right now, and this is true for the last probably 20 years, is to try to get things as loud as possible. Just push everything up against the ceiling of how loud we can get before it distorts, and try to get it to just sit there so that it sounds as loud as, or even better, louder than the other music around it. So that's what the loudness thing is all about. If you want to read some interesting history on this, you can Google the loudness wars. That's what it's called. So more on that once we get in the weeds. Two more quick things. One is that what we're going to be talking about here is digital mastering, or mastering for the purposes of streaming services. There is a separate kind of mastering that is vinyl mastering. Vinyl mastering is a completely different art, and I don't know very much about it. So I've never mastered anything for vinyl, and I wouldn't. if someone came up to me and said, will you master this for vinyl? I would say no, because it's such a different animal. We're not really going to deal with that. I'm assuming most of you are not mastering to vinyl, but if you are, you really need to get a pro who's experienced mastering for vinyl. And that's not me. And then the last thing that I just want to say here is, just like I said for the mixing class, or the mixing segment of this class, this is going to be an overview. This is not going to be detailed. I have a whole other class, like many hours devoted to the finer points of getting a master just right. So we're just going to do a couple videos here to talk about how you can master things in Live 12, the tools we have there, and how I would make it work. We're really not going to be able to go into the level of detail that you would really need. So consider this an introduction to how to master. We'll go into the real gritty stuff in that full other class if you want to search around for that. Okay, cool. Next, let's get set up. Okay, so here is our mixed version of this track. I'm going to set that aside for a second. Go to Live 12 and Command N. I'm going to make a totally new session. Okay, you can do this in session view or arrangement view, but I'm going to go to arrangement view. Okay, now before I pull in my track, I'm going to do two things. The first is I'm going to pull up my mixer. I'm going to make it nice and big. I really only need one track here, so actually let's get rid of everything except one audio track. And then let's make our mixer nice and big. Okay, we're not going to need these sends. We really just need our main and maybe this track mixer. Either way, we're going to make sure both of those are set right to 0. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's thing one. Make sure your levels are set to 0. Thing two, we are going to turn off our grid. So I'm going to control click somewhere on the timeline. And we have adaptive grid, fixed grid, and we're just going to go to off. Okay, now we see these dotted lines. That's going to let me really just get anywhere. Not on the grid, just wherever I need to be. Okay, now I'm going to pull in our track. All right, I'm going to line it up to the beginning. And I'm going to make sure it's got a little bit of a fade at the beginning and at the end. Now you see it looks like this already has music right from the get-go. Let's hear it. Yeah, it's got that bass just starts right away. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom way in. This tiny fade in we need, it can be a couple of milliseconds. I just don't want to hear a click there. So that little fade in that Live did automatically is just fine. Next, I want to make sure that the end is right. Oh, actually, before I do that, I need to do one other thing. Double click on that file and make sure warping is off. Okay, right down there. We're going to turn warping off. We're going to make sure that we're not warping this. Now I'm going to open up the beginning and make sure we're getting all of it there. Okay, let's go to the end. Okay, so when I turned warping off, it kind of stretched it out. That's fine. I'm going to delete that and then just reopen this all the way to make sure we're getting the whole track. Now I'm just going to look at what's at the end. So it looks like the sound stops here, and then we've got about 2 seconds of silence. Let's hear that. Okay, so it just stops. Is that what I want to happen musically? Yeah, okay, I kind of like it like that. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure there's a little fade anyway. So here we're down to silence. Let's tighten that up a little bit. So I've only got maybe a second of silence at the end here. 57 to 58. There's roughly a second. I'm going to make sure we've got a little fade at the end. Okay, even though we're in silence and fading to silence, we're just going to prevent any kind of clicking or anything weird like that. All right. And that is good. That is our basic setup, okay? Next, let's start doing some maximizing. Okay, let's make this thing louder and maybe sounding nicer. So we're going to do more than just making it louder. Another thing we're going to do is make sure that there's nothing frequency wise going crazy. There's no like rogue frequencies just going off or whatever. We're happy with the bass, we're happy with the high end, the mids, all of that. So we're going to use 3 tools for this. The first is going to be an EQ8. Okay, so let's go to an EQ8 and throw that on there. The second is going to be a multiband dynamics, which if you remember is 3 compressors in one. And then we're going to throw a glue compressor on the end, okay? So these are our 3 main tools that we're going to use. Now, I should also say there's kind of 2 other things you could do here. It is not uncommon to go outside of live for mastering. Even if you're a live evangelist, a lot of people like using a plugin or multiple plugins. So what I'm going to try to do here is do it all in live. But when I'm really mastering stuff, don't tell anyone, I'm using Ozone more times than not. So there's a plugin called Ozone that's designed for mastering, and it's very good. But if you don't want to buy that plugin, you can do it with what's in live. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so first with our EQ, I'm just gonna, just to make sure we're only hearing what we know we're hearing, I'm gonna turn those 2 effects off. Okay, now let's go out to here. I'm just gonna highlight something and loop it. First thing I'm gonna do with my EQ, let's make it nice and big. All right, let's roll off that bottom end again, just to be super sure. Right around 20 hertz, 21, that's good. Make sure we're not losing any big bass frequencies, and then we're just gonna prevent anything from building up down there, any rumbly stuff. Okay, the next thing is like kind of, to me, the hardest part. Really, it really is, because it's real aesthetic choices that we gotta make here. So what we're going to do is what's called ringing it out. So I'm going to take just one band of our EQ right here, and I'm going to just listen. First, I'm going to crank up this band, and then I'm just going to kind of scrub. And first, I'm going to listen for any frequencies that just really pop out in doing this. And if they're a problem, then I'm going to invert what I'm doing, and I'm going to go like that. And I'm going to get rid of some of those frequencies. But also, I'm listening for any kind of sweet spots that need a little boost, right? So I'm just saying like, oh, I like that, I don't like that. And I'm just applying EQ in subtle ways, just to bring out things that I think sound nice. So there's not like a whole bunch of math to this. This is really kind of like just kind of what sounds good. So let's do it for a minute. Okay, I don't really hear any problematic frequencies. It kind of looks like there's some stuff jumping out down right there, but it's just that bell. So I don't really want to cut that. For boosting, I'm looking right in the mid-range, right around 500 to 10K. Probably not 10K, maybe 8K. So right, it's like, you know, here to here roughly. Okay, I am gonna give a little boost up here. I just kind of like the way that sounds. Okay, So we're good with the ring it out stage. I could do that all day. I could literally sit here all day and say, well, that sounds good and that sounds good. That's why it's the hardest part. But eventually, you got to stop and move on. Okay, so that's our main work with the EQ. We could add more bands if we wanted and see if we can find anything else that's ringing or needs to come out or that we want to boost. Everything is about subtlety here, though, okay? So if you find yourself doing something like this, you might want to consider going back to your mix, right? Because we would be really changing it a lot. So, but something, let's tighten up the Q. If there's something ringing, you might do something like this and just find it down there. Okay, I don't really hear that in this mix, so I think we're good with just that. So let's move on to our multiband dynamics. Okay, next it's time to get over to our multiband dynamics. Now this is where we're going to try to get more loudness out of this thing. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to leave my glue compressor off, and I'll leave my EQ on. So first, if you remember what this effect is, basically we have 3 different compressors separated by an EQ. So we've got high, mids, and lows, and compression that we can do on each of them, right? So let's set up our high and low threshold. So let's get rid of our EQ for a second, and we can solo each band. So let's listen for the highs. So what we're kind of listening here for is something that we can kind of use as like the center point, and the snare is pretty good for that. So what I mostly want to hear in the highs are all the shimmery stuff, distortions, things like that. Not too much musical material and not too much of that snare. So we can go up a little bit higher. The snare went away on me. There we go. Alright, that's okay. It's a tad high. But now let's go down to the lows. What we really want to hear here is the rumble. Again, not too much of the snare, but from the other direction. Okay, that's pretty good. So let's go with that. Okay, next let's add a little bit of compression. So let's go here. Okay, so let's go back and solo the highs. Just look at the highs. So our main threshold is going to be here. So we're going to go down until we're doing some work here. Okay, now what's happening here is each of these vertical lines is 10 dB that it can go up. So if we click in the middle of this bar and then drag down and do something like this, now each of those lines within that bar is also 10 dB. So 10 dB is now becoming a lot smaller inside the top of that threshold. This is a really weird way to look at compression. It's different than any other way in any other compressor, and to be totally honest, it really is confusing to me. This doesn't gel with my brain chemistry all that well, but that's what's happening. All right, next let's go to the bass, and we'll do basically the same thing. We're just going to go down until we're getting in the business of that sound, and then we're going to just kind of crank it a little bit. Bass always, I usually use a little less compression than anywhere else. So I'm a little bit lighter in the bass. Okay, so let's maybe lighten that up just a little bit. And then we'll do the same thing to the mids. Those are really up there. That's where I think a lot of our action is. There's not a lot of motion right now. But you can see that little yellow tick is showing us the kind of amount of our compression up there. Okay, now I'm going to go out of solo mode, and then we need to balance these three things. So we have an output volume here, okay? So we're going to kind of crank that a little bit to get our mix back sounding good. Our bass is kind of good right there. Okay, so we're going to kind of delicately balance those things and make sure they are blending just the way we want. All right, then we're going to go to one last layer of compression with our glue compressor. All right, time to turn on this glue compressor. Now this glue compressor does two things for us. It does another layer of compression, which we're going to use a little bit. But then it's also a limiter. So remember what a limiter does is it says, this is the ceiling, no volume is going to go higher than that. Okay, and its default built-in ceiling is -0.5, which is pretty hot, but that's okay. We'll get to that when we get to that. So here's what we're going to do here. First, we want our attack and release for mastering to be pretty fast. So let's just go there and there. I like the release just to be all the way as fast as it'll go. Ratio, we're going to leave put. Now threshold, we're going to pull down just so that we're getting a tiny bit of compression here. There we go. Not a lot. We want this last compressor just to be grabbing anything that's just popping out. Any weird jumps. Okay, cool. Now for the limiter. We're going to turn on this soft clip, and we want to send signal up into that and be hitting that ceiling just barely. Okay, and we're going to do that with makeup gain. Okay, now heads up, this is going to get loud. When you do this, everything's going to start to get really loud, so you might turn down your volume or do whatever you need to do. And as you're listening to this, if you have headphones on right now, this is going to get loud. So just heads up. Keep your hand on your volume knob for the next minute. Here we go. So I'm going to push makeup gain until it hits that clip and we see that light just a teeny tiny bit. There it is. All right, perfect. Okay, but we're not done yet. So we need our final master to be right around -4 dB. That's kind of the sweet spot. That's what a lot of the streaming services require, although their requirements for volume are a moving target sometimes. But right now, I think it's -4. So what we're going to do is, what we've done already is, because of the ceiling in our limiter, where nothing's going to pop out and go over -0.5. That's fine. That's great. But what we need to do now is get our RMS up there. So remember that RMS is an averaging value, right? So if we look at our signal, the thing that's popping up at the top, those are our peaks. The thicker line that's moving up and down, that's our RMS value. So we need to get that RMS value pretty close to our peaks and then have it sit right around -4. Okay, our peaks are going to go up to -0.5. Okay, so we need to push up our RMS. We can, and the way we're going to do that is with this makeup gain. We can push that sucker all we want. We can push it all the way to the top. We're not going to clip because that soft clip limiter isn't going to let us. It's not going to let anything go past -0.5. So we got a little bit more to go. So let's see where we are right now. Okay. So we're around, actually we're pretty close. Okay, so we're looking at the green values here, right? And we're sitting around -7, maybe -8. Okay, so we're gonna push this harder to get those up to -4. Pretty great. So now we are loud. We are nice and loud. All right, so that puts us right where we want to be. Next, I want to talk about a few more things with mastering, but that is essentially a master. That is a pretty decent master. Let's talk about inline mastering, audio effect racks. Okay, first let's talk about what we do once we're done. We're going to bounce it again. So we're going to go to our export settings, turn on MP3 if you want. The rest of these settings should be right on. Make sure your start and length are correct. Wave, power 1, everything else should be the same. So we should be good there. Okay, so earlier I said there's a few different things we could do, and I said in some cases I might use Ozone, and kind of the majority of real world cases I might use Ozone for this because it's so good at it. But there's another thing we could do also, and that is to look at our audio effect racks. If we go to audio effect racks and look at some of these presets, there are a good number of mastering ones. Full chain master, MIDI analog master, overdriven tape, parallel punch, punchy dance, you know, a bunch more. Let's take a look at one of these. Let's do this. Let's turn, let's see, MIDI analog. How about that? Let's put a MIDI analog master on it. Okay. Now I'm going to turn my mastering off and just hear theirs. Okay. It's pretty good. Here's mine. Mine's a lot louder. But maybe this one isn't dialed in quite yet. I mean, we could push it a lot louder. Oh, I had them both on, didn't I? Okay, so here's mine. Okay, now let's turn mine off. And here's theirs. Push that comp a little bit. Yeah, definitely bassier, much bassier. But we could adjust that. I mean, we could go into this, into the settings, and adjust what it's doing. We could totally do that. So don't forget about those audio effect racks. They're really handy. All right, one more thing I want to tell you about, and that is called inline mastering. Let's go to one more video on this topic, and then we'll be done. Okay, now there is a new, I don't know if I'd call it a trend. This is something I'm seeing some people do. I have one producer friend who swears by this, and that is to do inline mastering. Here's what that means. Let's take our master that we made. Let's get rid of this. So just our master. I'm going to turn it back on. I want to save this. So I'm going to put it into a group. Command G. And then let's click on the little disk and call it, it looks like I've already done this, but let's call it J's Mastering 2. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the session, the mix session, and I'm going to master right in this session. I'm going to go to my main track. I'm going to throw J Mastering 2 on it, or whatever mastering you want. The idea here is that you're mastering right on your main track, and you're not bouncing out to stereo and then mastering it. You're skipping a step. A lot of people are finding this to be really useful, especially if you got to work fast. This is going to sound pretty good. The advantage here is that if in the mastering process, if you find something that you're not happy with in the mix, you can just fix it. You don't have to go all the way back, fix it in the session, bounce it, and then start over again, right? So it can be valuable for that. It can be a little harder to mix because there's more to keep track of, harder to master because there's more to keep track of. I haven't done a lot of this. I do mine kind of the old-fashioned way, but it is a trend that some people are doing. I think it's pretty cool. I hope it catches on. I'm probably going to start doing it in some upcoming projects. So, inline mastering. Now you know.